Hey, how's it going, everyone? So there was a video going around with a guy who had shot a moose while he was snowmobiling. And whenever I see these videos, I go insane with the comments because people have no logic, global, universal principles that they apply to these things. And in order to make broad statements about, oh, was this guy right or wrong? Should he done this or that? Or was it wrong to shoot a moose or something like that? You have to make so many predicate conclusions and assumptions from religion or spirituality or lack thereof uh, to biodiversity to cause and effect and to effects thereafter from death of an animal. The short of it is that you really just need to focus on is a guy shoots a moose and the moose dies and is there on the ground. Okay, an animal is shot and dies. Very often there's people who are super emotional, like, oh gosh, he shot a moose, it was the big creature. It's just like, okay, so an animal dies. Now what's the morality, right or wrong? You have to first pick a basis of existence, right? In order to even begin to address this, someone has to first then have an assumption of, okay, are animals valuable? Are they valuable to another extent, like outside the universe? Are they spiritual? Do they have some sort of like extra-dimensional, supernatural kind of thing to it, right? You have to answer that question, yes or no, right? So step one, is there a grander spiritualized or universalized principle about the death of the animal? That has to be answered. Personally, I don't really see anything there. I haven't personally, in the empirical sense, witnessed a supernatural aspect. Obviously, super being above natural, it's illogical for me to say I can see supernatural stuff, but I don't subscribe to that belief set. Some people do, right? That's a big question that no one addresses as to why you should value this to begin with. Second, right, after you've looked at that aspect, then you have to look at the mechanics of what happens when an animal dies and is left in the wild. Okay, well, if an animal dies, bacteria, other animals, and things like that come in and eat the dead animal. Unless the animal is put into some sort of acetylene torch chamber and is burnt and is changed to energy states very quickly, it's food. It has just become food, and it is now sustaining a whole new life cycle for possibly small microorganisms or even bigger organisms. It just created a new venue for other types of organisms to come about. If you want to be really gross, if there's flies and they're laying eggs and maggots and stuff like that, well, that opportunity came about because there's a dead animal. There's new life. And, many years ago, people thought, oh, does, new life come from dead meat? And they discovered doing little tests. No, actually, flies are laying eggs, and it's something that people don't think about when they think about an animal being shot and dead. It's like, okay, if it's not destroyed, then it just became food and nourishment and possibly housing and shelter for a whole host of other organisms. It's like, okay, well, that would change your perspective, I would hope, if you're rational, would change your perspective as to the nature of the death of a living animal, that is a mammal that has, warm blood, that is a large mass compared to many other many others in its peer group. Then beyond that fact is the question of why is it wrong for a human to shoot an animal? I mean, that's its own other question. The relationships between a human being and an animal, right? That's its own discourse. I mean, we just talked about the universals, like, is this animal special in the universe? We just talked a little bit about the after effects, what happens when an animal dies and there's nothing else dragging it into another, energy state that is, totally consuming it so that other creatures can't. And now we have to look at the relationship between the actor and the animal, the person and the animal. Again, these also can go through that whole big cycle. What is the human in the universe? Is the human just nothing more than atoms and all these chemicals interacting, and people don't have free will? Do they have a free will? Are they a spiritual being? Is there some sort of higher accountability or purpose to killing it? To killing an animal, or you shouldn't do anything. Is it like many Middle Eastern religious beliefs? Sorry, not Middle Eastern, but like Eastern, not Middle Eastern, Eastern religious beliefs that might see being peaceable with all living things as a good thing, the karma principle? Or is it another religious belief? Or is it no religious belief, right? I mean, you have to consider all these factors in terms of that relationship. Then some people try to say, well, maybe there's a rational side. Oh, you have a brain that is more advanced. Well, then are you saying that that person has a choice as to that animal? Because you have to assume the free will part. Then you have to say, okay, well, you can make a choice. And if you can make a choice to not kill that animal, then you shouldn't. Well, why? Now you have all these other reasons. And then some people try to say, oh, well, there's scarcity. Maybe this animal's endangered. What is endangered to what? There's ecosystems, but there is no such thing as a grander purpose without a grander purpose. You can disrupt an ecosystem, but you cannot. That is as it currently is arranged over a period of measured time. But you can't then say there's an end purpose to that. You can't prove, at least empirically with human terms, whether or not what you're doing is damaging some greater scheme, and that assumes that there's possibly some sort of scheme maker, right? I mean, in other words, humans can be more destructive to the environment than other creatures because of our ability to create and manipulate. We can do a lot more physical damage to other living organisms, things that have cells dividing. We can destroy those much more quickly because of the technology we create. But then to say that that is wrong requires predicates of beliefs about the universe, beliefs about spirituality or lack thereof, beliefs as to human beings and to those other animals. And when you put all these things together and you see how people respond to these things, and then you get them to actually answer you on these issues, you start to see there's a crazy diversity, and people don't really actually have much of a commonality as to whether or not something is right or wrong as to this animal. When you start hearing all these people's beliefs, and some of them I find to be just crazy, and I'm sure you would too if you took the wide swath of people commenting on these things as to what they believe is real. But all these different reasons as to whether or not, oh, you shouldn't have killed him. You could have not shot him. You could have waited. You could have tried to turn your snowmobile around. I mean, the thing is at the end of the day, even taking into account all these considerations and factoring all these things, you just have a person who is a warm-blooded creature on this planet that just shot another creature on this planet in this giant galaxy with a giant universe. And what does that mean? Exactly. What does that mean? What does that mean within the big concept of everything? What does it mean? You have to you come down to these things and you start to realize, wow, a lot of what humans experience in terms of these gut reactions, like, oh, you shouldn't have killed that or killed Bambi, whatever, is because of a purely subjective microcosm, very narrowly focused, level of empathy towards selectively chosen organisms. The more humanistic, or the more cuddly or cute it is to a human, the more someone adores it. That's why not as many people are like, oh, you killed a mosquito, oh, tears, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have stepped on that cockroach, even though it's a complex living organism that reproduces and has fascinating features to its body and overall structure and design. But nobody cries about that. Oh, man steps on cockroach. There isn't oh, you didn't have to do that, you could have just let him outside. I mean, it's fascinating how subjective people are, and not only how subjective people are, but how little rational and philosophical thought they put into their these emotional gut reactions to things. I mean, to me, I think that he shot a moose. Okay, he shot a moose. I mean, when it comes to how humans treat each other, it's it's the whole other world. But as far as him and the moose, I think that the danger that people worry about is eugenics. Humans trying to exterminate other humans, but that comes from a question about how people empathize with each other, and not necessarily the moose population. But these things are just things that need to be thought out, regardless of whatever is true or truth within those broad questions. That these things aren't even thought out or fleshed out. That's the sad part. The sad part isn't that people have emotions or feelings or thoughts. It's that they never thought about why it is they feel that way. They've never been challenged as to what it is they believe and why they believe it. And if they did, I think they would probably at least I would think that a lot would fall in the gray of saying, okay, if we look at just the empirical parts, it's a moose. It's going to be eaten by the organisms. It's going to create new, life for other types of things. And my subjective value as to the moose population has nothing more than just my heartstring reactions, because there's no proof that the moose population is supposed to go on into eternity. Is it supposed to be moose forever, or the dinosaurs? Are they supposed to have lived on forever until whatever happened to them happened? You don't know. Nobody knows. Unless you've developed a time machine that goes that far in the future, you don't know what the future is going to be, and you don't know exactly for sure if there was a specific design as to those things, a specific schema that you're supposed to be falling into. It's a scary thing to think about, because living in the gray is a scary thing, but it's something that everybody's dealing with every day. So I know that was a lot deeper than just a guy shooting a moose and people's reactions, but that's how I approach everything in life, that depth of thought. And I think that kind of helps with the humility and understanding what it means to have the human experience and to think about things and why we do stuff or why we don't do stuff. Until later, I will talk to you via comments.